You are listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Protein Machining, and this week I am very happy to welcome Justin Gray, CTO of Toolpath Labs. How's it going, Justin?
Hey, Dylan. Thanks for having me on. I'm super excited to be here.
Thanks for joining me. I know that, we've been talking for quite some time, and it was funny. I realized the other day when we first started talking, you reached out over DM on Instagram, and you didn't have a picture or anything either, and I was like, this sounds like the most scammy BS. Like, I don't know if I'm even going to respond to this guy. And I'm very glad I did, because I really appreciate us talking like we have over the last few months. But looking back on it, I was like, man, I'm real taking a chance here of like giving this guy any information, let alone my name or anything.
I'm real bad at social media, real bad. I always have to ask my wife and my sister-in-law how to like do things on Instagram.
Well, it all worked out. So I think most of the listeners by now kind of know what Toolpath Labs does, but for those who don't, please let us know, 30,000 foot view, what do you guys do?
Sure. Toolpath is a CAM automation company, AI CAM automation. I can already hear the audience rolling their eyes at AI. Maybe we'll get into that a little later, but your venture-backed company, you got to put AI in the name. So my personal opinion is we've earned it, but I feel like I have to prove that to the community. And hopefully we'll get to do that over the next couple of months to a year. Our goal is really to help everybody that's making parts make more parts. I think there's a general fear, nervousness that AI is going to like come for your job. And that's not our goal. And I don't have any concern about that. I think we have to make 10 times as many parts with like hopefully twice as many people, but maybe half as many people if we're unlucky. And that's like really hard. We have to get, as an industry, we have to get a lot faster, a lot more efficient, and we have to figure out ways to do that. And I think AI CAM automation is a tool, a key critical tool in that chain. I mean, our goal is really to produce something that can analyze a part and get you a good bit of the way there, and program the way you would program, and make you more efficient at making parts.
That's killer. Yeah. And then right now, what does the product consist of?
Right. So our first step is actually going to be to release an estimating product. Our core belief is that if you can't even estimate a part properly, then you have no business programming it. And I feel very, very strongly about that personally. Having made a few parts myself now at this point, like if you can't, put your thumb in the air, if the AI can't put its digital thumb in the air and get pretty close to the right estimate of a part, right, then you have no business talking about programming it. Our estimation tool is powered by a program underneath it. And if you go check out the program now, you'll see that. When you upload a part, it'll show you what tools it's going to use, what order they're going to run in. It basically gives you the machining strategy, what features it's going to do in what order, feeds and speeds, all of that. So we're programming the part, but estimating is a little bit more forgiving, right? If the features are a little bit out of order, feeds and speeds aren't quite right, or the tool selection is not exactly perfect, not exactly how you'd run the part, it's hopefully still good enough that you can estimate it. And so that's what we're releasing at IMTS, is that estimating product. And folks can go and try it on the website now, pre-release, but its official launch will be at IMTS. And then in the coming months and year, we'll release our AI CAM automation tool on top of that.
Awesome. Yeah, we've talked a lot about that, off air, of how, I've lost my ass on numerous parts over the years, like even thinking that I know how to quote parts. And it is that one little feature that you forget. You're like, oh yeah, I do have to take a 30 thou end mill down, 500 thou. And you're like, great, that's 20 minutes of runtime I forgot about. Like, great. All right.
My original sin was I was having a lot of the folks in the company who, not everybody in our company has like a real strong machining background. We have a pretty diverse group. So we get together every once in a while and we like make parts, but I was dumb and I picked a part that I needed to ship to a customer for us to make. I was like, oh, this one will be pretty easy. But I just completely missed like a 10 degree or 20 degree included angle dovetail. And they were making the part and I'm like, cool, we're getting done. And one of the guys was like, what's with this weird angle on this feature?
Oh no.
And I was like, oh. So I like quickly like went onto a website and like overnighted the tool I needed to fix it. And I got a 10 degree dovetail because they told me it was a 10 degree dovetail. And then one guy was like, or is it 20?
So, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like
tool matching is tough. Like tool matching without looking at geometry is really tough, especially when people use such differing names for stuff.
Yeah.
You're like, what do you think included angle means? Like,
Right.
So yeah, I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Let's get into your backstory though, because I think that not only have you guys created a very cool product, but you have the background chops to kind of support developing something like this. I think that, you mentioned people rolling their eyes at AI. I think people also roll their eyes at people who just are like, oh, I graduated out of college and I, wanted to program something and seemed cool. But you've done some really cool stuff. So let's get into your background. How did you get to where you are now?
So I thought a bit about the story I wanted to tell here. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to go like way to the way start because I think it provides some context of how I ended up here.
Totally. We've had people start at Legos and 5 years old. So like, give us the gamut.
I'm not going to go. I mean, of course I had Legos at 5 years old and my office at home is full of Legos. They're all over the wall. I love Legos, but no, I'm going to start when I was about 14. I'm not exactly sure on the age, but it was about 14. My dad and I rode bikes together, like bicycles. And he had this bike that he'd had since he was 13, this like old steel diamond frame. He got it for his bar mitzvah. And he couldn't ride it anymore. He developed like sciatic nerve issues and basically his leg would go numb. So he switched to these things called recumbent bikes. And if you've never seen one, imagine like a lawn chair kind of like duct taped to a bicycle. And that's basically a recumbent bike, right?
Yeah.
And I thought this was the coolest thing I had ever seen. Like it didn't look like a normal bike. It was like low and aerodynamic and you could get ones that had like these full fairings on them to be like super aerodynamic. And my dad like went to this like guy in New Jersey and we tried all these different bikes because they come in all these different configurations. And I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And so my dad bought a bike, and this would have been in like the 90s. And back then, in the 90s, these bikes were like really expensive. Like, if my memory serves, like probably $6,000 or $7,000.
Oh wow!
And so and that's a lot today for a bike, but like back then, like a lot of money, right?
Oh yeah.
But he loved to ride bikes, and that was the only way he was going to do it. So he paid what he had to pay. And I was like, Dad, can I have a recumbent bike? I want a recumbent bike. And my dad was like, No. No, here, you can have this diamond frame bike that like I used to ride. But I was like really into it and really insistent. And so finally, like his compromise was like, he went online and he found this like plans to make this recumbent bike out of like literal muffler tubing that you took to Meineke and had them like bend into a shape. And then you like cut a bike like rear triangle off and welded it on. And so he's like, well, we could do this. So we did it, right? But we didn't have a welder, and my dad, I gotta be careful. He's going to listen to this, so I don't want to insult him. But my dad is a phenomenal surgeon and like healer of humans. But when it comes to things that aren't organic, he's a little bit out of his element. And so like he didn't weld the thing together. He like took this muffler and he like drilled a hole and he like bolted things together. And then we took it to get welded. But of course, you took this like thin wall tubing and drilled holes in it. And so I mean, the bike worked, and I remember distinctly I was training to go on a 100-mile bike ride with him. So I was like going out on bike rides, and I was a couple miles from the house, and the thing snapped in half, like while I'm riding it. And I was like, 14, no impulse control. And so I like picked it up and like stomped home like a mile, like carrying two halves of a bike, and, like threw it down at his feet and just stared at him. And I think we were like 2 weeks out from this century ride. And so he like didn't know what to, so of course he like rushed out to buy this he like bought a recumbent for me. And I rode this recumbent on the century ride and it all worked out. But like that moment was probably the moment that led to everything else. Because like I was like determined to build one that wouldn't crack in half.
So now you've told an equally good villain origin story or hero origin story. So let's bring that around.
Yeah. So, I mean, I went on to like, he bought like the crappiest welder ever. And I had no idea what I was doing. And there was no gas, no shielding gas or anything, but I like bought steel tubing and I made a couple of recumbents. And I think there was a fight one time where I told my dad I wanted to be a doctor. And he was like, you're not going to be a doctor. We're not having this discussion. Like, you need to go be an engineer. Here's a welder, go weld things. And so eventually I used that bike. Like that was what got me into Georgia Tech. I ended up getting a decent academic scholarship and they told me like I wrote this essay about the bike and all this stuff. And I had built this bike. And anyway, so it sort of like catapulted me into engineering. I eventually got really into aircraft. I really liked the SR-71 Blackbird. I got really into that. And so I went to Georgia Tech for engineering degree. And while I was there, me and a couple of friends in sophomore year, founded a racing team called Rec Racing. The team is still there at Georgia Tech, which I consider to be like one of my personal like lifetime achievements, that we founded this race team that like 20 years later, like is a real team that people get real value out of. Because we were just a bunch of morons like trying to build a $2,000 race car for the Grassroots Motorsports Challenge, having like zero idea what we were doing. And zero is probably being generous, like negative idea what we were doing. But that's where I became an engineer. Like I learned a lot at Georgia Tech, and I learned a lot about like calculus and physics and all of this stuff. But I became an engineer, like trying to engine swap a 1.8T engine into a Audi engine into a 1984 Volkswagen Golf, and failing miserably at it at every step. And then like later on working on BMWs and stuff. So like that's where I learned how to become an engineer and how to problem solve. And I did a little manual machining then, and a good amount of fabrication. But I remember like looking that we were in the same building as the FSAE guys and the Baja guys. And I remember like being very jealous of all the cool machining they were doing. And so I left Georgia Tech 2007. And I remember distinctly being excited to like go make money and then like someday have a hobby machine shop in my garage. Like that was like a personal goal of mine. But I ended up going to NASA, and I took a pretty solid detour from manufacturing at that point. I worked on designing jet engines and building really advanced optimization software for NASA. And I only bring that up in this context because it's kind of my resume for why I know what I'm talking about with AI. AI is powered by some optimization stuff that's like really closely related to what I did at NASA, even though it wasn't AI. So I built this really cool piece of software. It's called OpenMDAO. People can go check it out if they're interested. It's open source. NASA provides it to anybody. They're still developing it today. And I worked on that project for 14 years. At one point, I gave a talk at the AIAA conference called How to Succeed at MDO by Failing All the Time. And I talked about this like 14-year journey of just like repetitive failure. And like the only thing that mattered was like how quickly I could identify the failure to like reboot the program. But like that's like way deep in the weeds in math, tons and tons of optimization, this thing called adjoints and derivatives and optimization, all really closely related to AI. And then around 2019, like right at the like very beginning cusp of the pandemic, my friend Andy, who had co-founded Rec Racing with me, called me up and said like, hey, I'm leaving my other job. Like he had a successful exit from his other company, and he was interested in doing something. And would I be interested in going in with him? And we were talking about like maybe doing something based around what I had done at NASA, but I couldn't, there's no way to like do a startup on the side with the same thing you're working on at NASA. Like it's a conflict of interest. And there was a whole team of people that like weren't going to come do a startup. And I just wasn't ready to kind of like abandon them and go do this side thing. And so we were looking for other ideas, and Andy had bought a Tormach to, play on in his garage essentially, and learned how to use Fusion. And he was walking me through it, and he's like, well, you know about optimization. Like, could we like optimize this? And like, and when I say it now, I understand how stupid it is. I really do. Like, but I am pathologically attracted to the hardest problem I can find, as long as I don't know how hard it is.
Right.
And so I was like, yeah, I like coded some stuff and prototyped some stuff for like a couple of weeks, showed some like very, very simple results that I somehow convinced myself proved that we could do it. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And so I left my job at NASA. There's a pretty long overlap period, about a year and a half, where I was kind of like part-time at NASA and part-time at Toolpath, and then trading out those proportions till it was full-time at Toolpath, because it was really, really important to me to leave my other team in like good shape. And I wasn't planning to leave NASA, so there was no like succession planning or any of that kind of stuff. So it took a while to set that up. But as we started building up Toolpath, I started getting deeper and deeper into it and realizing that I was in way over my head. And I had this like weird moment of clarity one day. And I'm pretty sure it was after Chris Sabatini. Like I had talked to him a little bit. I had found out that he had worked at Plethora, I think from listening to your podcast. And I was like, oh, I need to talk to him about like what was like at Plethora. And he had like kind of read me the riot act about how this was like what had gone wrong there. And like, you can't be a company that's trying to make a lot of parts. You need to be focused on the software side of things. And I had this like moment of clarity where I was like, man, back when I started OpenMDO at NASA, I didn't know how little I knew. And that made it easier for me to just kind of like plow into the wilderness, like blindly ahead. But I'm older now. I'm quite a bit older. And so like, I'm a little wiser, I like to think. And like, I had this moment where I'm like, wow, I just realized how little I know about this. I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
And I would like to think I'm wiser, but I continued down the path anyway. So I didn't learn my lesson.
I think the thing that shows that you're wiser is that you did reach out to people like Chris, and you and I talked a bunch at length, and you listened. Like
Yeah.
I think I've said it on here before, and if I haven't, like initially, both Chris and I did not have a great opinion of Toolpath. And both thought you were just like this like cocky engineer who just, was like, well, you guys just, you don't know how easy this is. Like you've only spent your whole life at this, but you don't understand. And it was awesome seeing you buy a machine and start making parts and go, oh yeah, this is not as easy as I thought it was.
Oh man, when they put that machine in my garage, and like there was this like gut check moment, because like I ordered a Sile X7 and it's 5,000 pounds, and it's not a Tormach. This is a real industrial CNC machine, right? Like, and it's a good machine. I actually really like my Sile, but it's a single phase Sile. It's not an industrial machine. It's rigid. It's pretty accurate, but like, and maybe the 3-phase one is a little bit more industrial grade, but the one I have is very top end of the hobby grade. And I remember feeling like, yeah, I got a real machine. And then I called the rigger, and the rigger was like, yeah, we can get that into your garage. We're going to bring our smallest forklift. And I was like, I felt deflated. Yeah. And then they pop it in my garage, and I'm staring at this machine, and like, I've run the Tormach with Andy, and PathPilot's pretty easy to use, and I'm good at computers, and I'm staring at this thing going, I got no idea what I'm going to do, but I'm probably going to break this thing.
Yeah.
And I had to install the probe and the tool setter and everything, because I ordered it without that stuff, and like wiring it into the controller. It was a big hill to climb. I still don't know how I got up that hill and got that thing cutting parts.
Yeah, and like good, you like wrote your own probing macros and all kinds of stuff. Like it's really cool to see how far you've come with that machine. And then you bought the brother, and you're like, oh, all right, like I see what a real industrial machine is.
Yeah, that's a different beast. And I tried to explain it to Andy one time, because like the Sile is a big step up from the Tormach, and even just like the way it sounds when it tool changes, it sounds more sturdy. And so I put Andy in front of the brother for the first time, and the brother was like, he was like super excited to order the brother. He's like, this is like a holy grail machine for us. And then we got it up and running, and I'd been running it for a few weeks, and he came up. Andy lives in Atlanta, and I'm in Cleveland, but he came up to the shop, and I put him in front of the brother, and I'm like, press that green button, but like be ready, because it moves fast. And he's like, no, it'll be fine. And then he pressed the green button, and he jumped back like 5 feet while it like rapided into place and did a tool change. And it was a lot. And then he looks at me, and goes, okay. So yeah, the running the brother is pretty intense. It's honestly, it's still, if I'm not standing in front of it and it tool changes real fast, it sounds like it's crashing.
Oh, 100%. Because it's all physical, and it's just like slamming into the drawbar release, basically.
Yeah.
It completely ruins you for larger machines, though. Like the speed of it. Like I remember when I bought mine, and then I was still working my day job, we had a bunch of Matsuras, and I felt like I could go to sleep and take a nap while it was tool changing. I was like, I've got so much time. I can go run and get the water and like come back, and it's crazy. But so anyway, you bought a Sile.
We
what
started
else has
making
been going on?
Oh, well, we made some parts for a while, mostly just to like really feel like we could understand what it was like to make parts. Our goal was never to run like a production job shop. It doesn't make any sense. Never to run a job shop or a production shop. But really the purpose of our shop is to be an R&D facility where, we can test our code and run real parts on our machines. So we're through our job shop phase. That's not to say that I don't want to make parts. I still do, but we're in a different place now. We hired a new CEO. Al joined the company. You've had him on, and we've hired a bunch of people since, which has frankly been a wild ride the last 6 months. I still get a little dizzy every time I sort of take a step back and realize what's going on around me. And so now we're in a position where we get to do the R&D job shop thing, R&D shop thing, where we can make parts for free for people. So looking for opportunities to support the community and help education, looking for race teams that need parts made, or companies who want parts made but are willing to let us show the process of what it looks like to use automated CAM on their parts, and really start to refine that process. it's not figured out at all, which is why we're launching an estimating product, right? We want to build trust in the community. We want people to feel like, yeah, this is estimating well, and I'd be happy to see what these toolpaths look like. Even if they're not perfect, at least I know what's going on, and I know what I can and can't trust, and I know where to expect what's going to need to change. But how could I ask anybody to be like that if I'm not comfortable running those parts on my machines, right? Like, at least for me, there's always still a little like moment of hesitation when you go to hit the green button, right? Cycle start. Like, I hope I didn't screw this up. Did I, is the WCS in the right place? Did I probe the right thing? And that anxiety like amps up when you weren't the one who controlled all the programming, right? Like,
oh yeah.
So
yeah, it's, I think that's one of those things that's going to be hard no matter what. Like even me going from the brothers to the Hermla, where like now I don't like I don't have the opportunity to really watch things happen like I did with the brother. Like there's no point in me, like I can single block up into the tool being close to the part and be like, yeah, that looks right. But past that, it's like, all right, now it's going to whip all 5 axes around to do a deburr toolpath. I'm not going to sit there and single block 40,000 lines of code and make sure it's right. And so I think that it's the further down this rabbit hole we go, it's just about kind of trusting your tools, making sure that the people making them are doing their R&D and stuff, and making sure that it's doing what it's supposed to, and then just kind of throwing your hands in the air and going, all right, this is where the rubber meets the road. It's not easy though.
No, for sure. And as we get farther into it, this is where I have to think, being part of a startup like this, it's my job to think 6-8 months out from where we are. And so I'm starting to think about where simulation lives in that tool chain. Actually, it's pretty cool. I can announce to the listeners of the podcast a little inside information. Toolpath acquired NC Viewer just recently. And so that's going to become part of the Toolpath brand. You'll see the branding change on that website, but nothing else will change. It'll still be a free tool accessible to everybody. That's a really cool moment for me because NC Viewer was like critical as I was coming up to speed on how to run the machine. I remember being really shocked because PathPilot will render your G code and like even a little mouse and you can like look at it. And so I just assumed that that's how it worked on all controls. Well, that's not how it works on the LNC control, at least. And so everything I programmed, I ran through NC Viewer for months and months just to like look at the G code.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I told you, like I've used it probably since Xander came out with it. Like I was so stoked to hear that because it has been such a critical tool for me. Like at my last job, we had so many jobs that were either hand programmed or programmed in whatever Creo was beforehand. Anyway, they were softwares we didn't have access to anymore. And so like the only way, if I needed to do a documentation update or something, or there was no documentation, I had no way of knowing what was going on unless I did use something like NC Viewer where I could just plop the code in and go, okay, clearly this hole that it says is at X0, Y0, that's my G54. Awesome. I can use it, like that. And so it's been fantastic, and it's super cool to hear that you guys acquired it and, have that technology now.
Yeah. So I'm starting to think about how that integrates in. And, when you're talking about getting to CAM automation, and we are not there right now, just to be clear, but, the simulation has to become a critical part of that chain. Basically, like in the context of CAM automation, there's never any G code that's run that's not simmed. On most 5-axis machines, I think most people will sim just about everything before they run it. But on a lot of 3-axis machines, if it's simple enough, people won't sim it. Not everybody will sim everything every time. And I get it. Like it takes a long time. It's like an extra step. You have to remember doing it. I myself have stood in front of the machine and been like, oh, I need to like adjust a step over. I'm not going to resim that. Just post it and go, right? That you can't do that in an automation context, right? Like unless you're going to pull it into Fusion and check it yourself and verify everything, you need it simmed. And so I think NC Viewer will play a pretty key part in that tool chain. I'm not sure how exactly we're going to work that in yet. And like I said, the core NC Viewer product isn't going to change, but we will pull that technology in. And as we go forward, that kind of simulation step has to be a critical part of it. So I can't quite say exactly how we're going to pull that off. We'll make some announcements about that at IMTS about technology that we're going to be able to leverage there. But simulation is a critical part of that tool chain for us. And I'm not proud to admit that I've crashed my machine. Tim Paul came on the podcast and when I remember very distinctly listening to his episode, and he said like, I've only had one crash, and you don't crash a car and you don't crash a machine, and they're the same thing. And I remember thinking like, oh man, that's a good point. It's not okay.
I I loved him, but I think he's a very special person in that regard.
Yeah.
When you crashed your machine, all I could think was one of us, one of us.
But unfortunately, I'm not proud to admit that I've done it enough now that like it's kind of ingrained in me that like I would just never hit the button from an automated cam system unless it was fully simmed, right? And you can't trust humans to do that. They need, the system needs to do it for them. So yeah, that's a pretty critical part of the tech chain. And I feel really, really strongly about that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, let's jump into some questions. First up, from Al and Black Fox Machining. Al says, "What do you think of your new boss?" And Black Fox Machining, aka Ben, says, who is your favorite coworker in the shop? So
wait, I didn't read the question that closely. Is that word for word what Al asked?
Yeah, he says, "What do you think of your new boss?"
Ooh, Al's in trouble. I remember very distinctly when Al signed his letter to join Toolpath, and I was so excited and shocked. Like, why does Al Watmo want to join Toolpath, right? Like, so humbled and flattered and amazed and beside myself. And I called him up and I said, "Welcome to Toolpath, boss." And he said, "Okay, that's the only one." And I said, "The only what?" He goes, "Don't call me boss again." So there you go. He said it in his question. I got him there. No, look, Al's been amazing and a great partner. I think he and I get along better than we have any right to for how long we've known each other. And honestly, it's less than a year that we've been collaborating, and he's only been at Toolpath for I think 3 or 4 months now. But like it's like he's been here the whole time. And you got to give Andy a lot of credit for stepping aside as CEO from outside Toolpath. I think people might have thought that was a little bit odd. But it was absolutely the right move to do. Like Andy and I don't understand the market and the community the way Al does, and he can guide us into the community. We have a big booth at IMTS, and Al's put together a really cool community event with this cornhole tournament. And like neither Andy or I would have ever come up with anything like that. And frankly, if we had, nobody would have participated in it because we're just two tech bros trying to, start a tech company. And so
I think anybody who thinks about it at any kind of more depth realizes that it's very much the same kind of celebrated move that Matt from Pocket NC did, where he was like, this is not my wheelhouse. Like, there are things in this company I can do very well. Being CEO is probably not my best use of my talents. And so I think that it was a great idea. Like, clearly you guys hired the talent that you needed and you knew was the right person to, hit that ball out of the park kind of thing.
But, Al, he understands like I said, the industry in a way that he has so much more experience than I do. And so like when he confidently structures how we're going to market the product and what our pricing strategy is going to be. And he's talked about that there before on the podcast himself. But like, these are things that like Andy and I would obsess over and like take a half step toward and then change our minds and try another thing and like try and get some kind of market signal. When the reality was the technology was just too young for us to have any kind of real market signal as to what pricing strategy was going to work. And so, Al's like, well, I've seen this before. Like, I know what the history of Fusion was and how it developed, and we know what went well there and what went wrong there. And this technology, I don't want to speak for Al, but the way he talks about it is like, extending the community that he worked hard to build in Fusion, and bringing the next level of that technology out, very much in the same vein, the way that he guided Fusion into the market. That's how he wants to guide Toolpath into the market. And for my part, to be honest with you, it's a huge weight off my shoulders. Like, I get to focus on the core tech. I don't have to think about go to market. This whole IMTS thing, like Al just took care of it. He brought in the people that needed to be there. And I just focus on making sure that it works as good as it can. And it's just great. So please don't leave me, Al.
And then who's your favorite coworker in the shop?
Yeah. So I know what Benjamin thinks I'm going to say here because it's just he and I in Cleveland. We're a globally distributed company. Actually, at this point, actually globally, I think we have people in every time zone now. But Benjamin and I are the only two full-time Cleveland employees. And so, obviously my favorite employee in the shop is actually Chris Zapatini. Chris has been hanging out here this week. And so, it was really fun, blowing up end mills and pushing the Fraser end mills till they gave in. But yeah, Chris is definitely my favorite employee in the shop right now. No,
Sorry, Ben.
Benjamin does a great job, and he's really taken to his new role as our content manager and our lead of content. And I think he's going to do a great job sort of building out the content that we need, because there are some challenges bringing tech like this to the market. It's just everything's a little bit different. The way you interact with the system is a little bit different. And the AI is going to make some decisions, which we plan to give you control over how you change them, but it's going to come in with decisions. And that takes education, and people need to be shown how to set things up, how to set up their tool libraries and stuff. And Benjamin's doing a great job with that.
For sure.
So,
yeah. I think that one thing that has made me very excited for you guys and, continuing to want to talk to you and support everything you're doing is that you guys are taking a very people-centric approach to automation, which I think that sounds in and of itself kind of a contradiction, but like that's, I feel like, the only way to do it, because
it doesn't
otherwise
work otherwise. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I do really appreciate that. Let's see. JT from DFM Toolworks asked, will Toolpath try to offer toolpaths that Fusion 360 has not shown an appetite for, such as plunge milling?
I feel like JT might be Andy. And that's his pseudonym. Only because I remember the very, very first days of Toolpath when Andy and I were talking about what it would look like and how would an AI automation do things differently. And he was showing me plunge milling videos, and he's like, you're going to see this and you're going to think just plunge all the things, right? And we haven't done it at all, other than some very early prototypes. Can tell you that we definitely will support some toolpaths that are not native to Fusion. I can't say a lot more than that till IMTS. We'll make some announcements then. We haven't talked about plunge roughing specifically in a little while, but that's an interesting idea to let the AI decide if it's faster to plunge. That's one of those really tricky situations, though, because maybe you don't care if it's faster. Maybe you don't want to plunge it, or maybe you're work holding it, or your part's not rigid enough, or maybe your part's not rigid enough to not plunge rough it. It's
right.
There's a million reasons. And so that's the kind of situation where you would program a part different than I would. And so setting up an AI that has the potential to do that, but that you can tell it how you want it to program, and maybe you have different profiles for this kind of part or that kind of part. That's one of the big challenges that I'm personally really focused on, is how to give the AI a communication language that you can talk to it with. And so I guess this is kind of not quite answering the question. So directly, I haven't looked at plunge roughing in quite a long time, but it would be really cool to add that as an option and let the AI choose, am I going to adaptively clear this, or traditional rough it, or plunge rough it? That would certainly make a neat demo at some point. But my opinion is, in reality, people are going to want to tell it plunge rough this or not, kind of thing.
Right.
And so I'm kind of committed to making sure that you have the ability to do that.
Awesome. Ben at Fort Manufacturing had a great question. He said, I'd be interested in hearing what drove the choice of programming languages and frameworks. And then he's got a few other questions, but let's start there.
Oh, my kind of guy, man. Nerd out. If you're going to be at IMTS, come talk to me in the booth. We can go into all kinds of detail about this. I wanted to use Python. That would have been the sort of obvious choice, I think, especially in the AI space. But I knew that Python, we're way down in the weeds, and not a lot of people are going to love the sort of super nerdy tech computer talk. But Python is a slow language. They're trying to fix it, but it's really slow. And I knew that we were going to be doing some pretty intense computational geometry. Fusion, can sometimes take a really long time to compute toolpaths. And so if you just even go by that as a guide, I could tell that we were in for some pretty serious effort. And then also GPU programming was something we were looking into. We're not doing a lot of it right now, but it's still on the table. And Python does an okay job there, but not a great job. So I knew I needed something a little bit more performant, which would tend to lead you toward C or C++. But I don't like coding in either of those languages. And I'm sorry if there are any C++ fans out there. I'm really sorry. It's just not my cup of tea. And so that led me to Julia. I had played around with it a little bit at NASA. And it's kind of the best of both worlds. If you know what you're doing, it can be as fast as C or C++. It has some pretty smart people working on GPU support for it. But it also programs a lot like Python. It's not perfect. And there's definitely a learning curve there, but it was my compromise language. And I don't have any regrets about that. There are some challenges around DevOps and stuff that you take for granted in the Python world, like testing frameworks and stuff, that you have to put a little bit more effort into with Julia, because it's a much narrower niche language. And sometimes it's hard to find people who have like the skill to program in Julia. So we just don't like, we hire people and then teach them Julia. But that's why we chose it. Yeah.
Huh. His second question, how has working in the manufacturing industry affected how your team approaches application development? And then also, what's on the roadmap for APIs and other hooks, integrations to machines, software, et cetera?
I'm going to answer those in opposite order. We would like to offer an API someday. It's not on the immediate roadmap. I'm not going to even pretend to have a timeline. And part of the challenge is that like the user interface for CAM is pretty critical to make it work. And so if we offer API integration, then there's this whole question of who builds the UI that like makes it possible. How do you trust an estimate if you can't like see the tool paths that are associated with it and see what op 1, op 2, op 3 look like? I guess maybe someday we'd get to the point where you just have enough data to know that you can trust it at the estimate level, and whatever that number is, you're going to accept some error rate. But we're years and years away from that. So because of the whole UI complexity layer, we don't have any immediate plans to release an API. If somebody's really, really interested in that and wants to come talk to me about it, come find me at IMTS or hit me up on Instagram or for my contacts, which I think we'll probably put in the show notes. Happy to chat about it, but no immediate plans there. Manufacturing is interesting because so much of the tech world is not, they call it bits, not atoms is some of the speak, like computer bits instead of atoms. And now the software has to actually like make chips. And so, early on in Toolpath, we would drive it by like machining apart. Like everybody would push code and then I'd go put a chunk of material in the silo and hit the button. I'm not proud of how many times it took me to cut that Xometry part, the Xometry test part. It's over 20 that I made before we got it right. And like the last 15 were all like chasing some very, very tiny bug in the code, right? Like, and so that, gave everybody an appreciation because like if we didn't get it right, we were all sitting there for 45 minutes to an hour while I machined this chunk of 316 stainless with my single phase mill and feeds and speeds that I didn't understand. And I think, even today, that's, still our perspective. That's why we have the brother. That's why we invest in high quality work holding, because we want to know and feel that like the software is driving a real application, right? And so we can't just like run a set of automated tests and deploy it and like hope it works. And so I would say our general philosophy is that like stuff has to run through our shop first, or some of our like very sort of trusted partners who understand what they're getting into while they're testing the software. It's kind of more analogous to like what I would imagine like a self-driving car company would feel in terms of the responsibility for the quality of their software, right? And that's really what it comes down to, is that you just have to take very seriously that like bugs have serious consequences.
So are there certain things that you've put into QC that you normally wouldn't?
I would say that what we do has a lot of very manual QC right now, because ultimately it has to go through Fusion and then get posted out, and we don't have a way to automate that. And even if we did have a way to automate it, you still want to like visually check it. And so I always strive for more and more automation, which makes sense. We're a tech company trying to build CAM automation. We should have our development pipeline as automated as it can. But there are certain steps in the process, like posting out the code through Fusion, which our goal is to automate up to Fusion and then leave you with a program that you can modify and post. And so that last step is very human in the loop, and that's QC right now. And so we kind of round robin who does that QC, because I want everybody to go through that process and know what that looks like. But yeah, that definitely is a slow step in the process, and it definitely costs us some time. Like somebody spends 20 or 30 minutes every day QCing the software before we, are ready to push it out to production. And that's different. Most tech companies wouldn't accept that level of manual. They would look for a way to automate it, but there is no way for us to automate it right now. So
that's great. No, I think that speaks to you guys taking it seriously, because like you said, it is important when people have, their businesses riding on like a few machines. Like you guys are seemingly equally targeting small shops as well as big shops, and these small shops might have one machine, and so like if they crash it, that's a serious thing.
Man, I've been there. At one point, my silo started randomly shutting down, and it turned out to be an easy fix, but like it was, of course, right in the middle of a job, and like, yeah, it was a nightmare. I've been there. Like, I empathize with that fear of like, please don't go down, let me finish this part.
I unfortunately have been there as well. Let's see. Doug asked top challenges for the CTO role in a software startup in this market segment.
This market segment is not very big. There's only a few other companies out in the space. So I'm just going to pretend that last part of the question didn't exist and just say top challenges for the CTO. I've never been a CTO before. I ran a small team at NASA, which is very different. Running a small, I guess I would call it an intrapreneur team at NASA was very different than being the CTO of this company. For one thing, I'm people's boss, which is very different from how it was at NASA. I was people's like technical mentor there, but like I couldn't fire them and it wasn't up to me if they got a raise kind of thing. So every discussion has different weight. And so I've like at NASA, I had a group of people who treated me more like a peer than like a boss. And if there was like a tie-breaking vote or if I needed to say like, well, this is my call, I'm going to make it, I could kind of put my manager-ish hat on. And at Toolpath, it's kind of the opposite. Like the default is I'm your boss. I'm the CTO of the company and you kind of have to do what I say. And I need to tell people to not view me that way because my management style is very much sit down next to you and talk about the problem and just get in the weeds with you. And so I very often say like, I'm taking my manager hat off right now. I probably don't say it enough as we've brought on more new people. I should get back into that, but I very actively try to engage with people in a way that's not CTO, boss employee. And I find that very challenging because most of the time I'm not in boss mode. Like 99% of the time I'm not in boss mode, but their view of me is the opposite. At least that's my perception. And so I find that really challenging. The other hard part, to be frank, is that we are a small company. And since Al joined, the last 6 months have been really, really different. But we, small company where everybody has to do everything. And so traditionally, you might think of a CTO as like a very high level sort of vision approach, like looking at the hard problems, not down in the weeds. But I'm deep down in the weeds. In the last 6 months in the lead up to IMTS, we've needed every bit of velocity we had. So we keep our sprints to like a 1 week time cycle. Sprint, if you're not familiar with it, is like the chunk of time where a team works on a fixed set of features. And that's insane. 1 week time, 1 week sprints are insane. If you go talk to any other tech company, they would laugh at you. It's like the equivalent of having parts that have an 8-second runtime or something. That's what it feels like to the programmers. But I chose to do it because it alleviates some of the friction from them for having to like make estimates and like manage their own schedule. Because like if their project they're working on doesn't go well, the worst that happens at the end of the week, we lost a week. And so it helps them move faster, but it puts a lot of the management, sprint management and like project planning load on my shoulders. And that's not something that a CTO typically would take on. At smaller startups, lots of CTOs take that role on, but you wouldn't normally see a CTO taking on that role in a 3-year-old company. I'll freely admit that I probably struggle to let go of the reins there more than I should, and I do sometimes get conversations from Andy and Al about how I need to, delegate more and let other people take the reins, and that's one of the things I have to do better about is figuring out how to empower people to take ownership over stuff. So. We are looking at changing up our dev schedule and lengthening the sprints out to 2 weeks after IMTS. But obviously, just like everybody else in the industry, like full steam ahead, warp 15 to IMTS, and we'll figure out the rest later.
Totally. His other question: underreported or underappreciated benefits of AI in this application of the technology. That's
an interesting question because I feel like to date, AI hasn't offered much benefit to the industry, if I'm being blunt. And I would include Toolpath in that group, right? Like I think the tech we have in the last 6 months has reached the level where it's interesting to folks and worth folks trying out, but by no means is it done in like the easy button for estimating, right? Please don't download Toolpath and just send out quotes from it blindly. It is not ready for that yet. It does an okay job, and it'll certainly help you bring some consistency, but it is not, mindless auto quote machine.
Its feature ID though is very good. Like I think
thanks.
that, like it's certainly better than my eye is for this, weird stuff. Like we talked about that part the other day that you found a super micro step on. Like, I'm not going to see that probably. You know, maybe I'll catch the light in the 3D environment just quite right and see that. But, you know, I think that that's the kind of stuff that can really save your bacon.
I think Tim Paul had a moment a couple of weeks ago. He handed us a part to analyze, and it came back and it said this pocket's not machinable. It has drafts on the walls. And he said, no, it's a bug. I've made that part hundreds of times in classes. I've had people program that part. And then he came back to me the next day and he was like, no, I was wrong. Like, look here in the CAD, I've literally cammed this part hundreds of times and nobody has realized that there was like a very tiny draft angle, you know, on this wall, like a back chamfer or a dovetail. But it was there. It was there in the part. I don't know how it got there. I have no idea because that part was CAD'd to be a test part for training. So I don't know, like it baffles me how this dovetail got there, but it's there and stuff like that. You know, I think it doesn't only help machinists, but like, hopefully it helps the people sending parts out, right? Like catch mistakes. Like you forgot a fillet, right? Like too many corners to click and you missed one fillet. In my short time making parts, I saw at least 15 RFQs where there was very obviously a fillet that they meant to be on, you know, like 4 corners in a pocket and 3 of them have fillets. Like,
Yep, exactly. That happens so much, so much for me. Yeah, it's crazy. You'll have like 30 holes and 28 of them will have chamfers on them. I'm like, I feel like you want all of these, but you know, maybe I'm wrong, I guess.
It's funny because I've been on both sides of that table. Like I hesitate to call myself a machinist. I'll say apprentice machinist, but I machine things now, right? Like I'm in the manufacturing community. So I'm on the side of the table that receives the RFQ. But at NASA, I was on the other side. And I knew enough about machining to know like when you needed radiuses and stuff, but I've watched engineers like just send parts that were insane to make just for no reason. Like at one point I was a part of a project at NASA and somebody sent a part off to Xometry and they spent $5,000 on this part. And I was like, it just had like, it was $5,000 because it had a big flange on it and then like a 12-inch long kind of beam. And they sent it as one part. And I looked at it, I was like, could we bolt the flange to this? And they're like, oh yeah, fine. That would be totally fine. So I split it apart and put it back in Xometry and it went down to like $200. Right.
Yep.
Like, cause somebody had to like, you know, machine out this 12-inch reach part or whatever.
Yeah.
So I like being on this side of the table now, I often am just so frustrated at the lack of like manufacturing thought that comes by for parts. At one point we played around with a slogan for Toolpath, like early on, that was like Toolpath's responsibility is to make peace between the engineer and the machinist, one part at a time.
I don't know how well that would sell, but I do appreciate the sentiment quite a bit.
Yeah.
That's great. Let's see. Also from the Patreon, our friend Zap asked, how does it feel to be an emerging dad to the industry? Even with money in the bank, how difficult was it to leave NASA to start a company in a space that had already seen some flameouts? People say it's good to be first to market. In this case, it seems to have greatly benefited Toolpath to come in a little bit later. What did you learn from the companies that preceded Toolpath? So there's a couple questions in there. First up, how does it feel to be a dad to a emerging industry?
Bizarre in both that it's odd and I feel right at home. I'm really proud that at NASA, I put a ton of effort into mentoring like lots of people in education, lots and lots of people, many of whom I keep close ties with today, and some of whom sent me parts to make for them when I came over here. So that's like where my happy space is like mentoring like the next generation. And in NASA and in optimization, where I had spent my entire career like building up this expertise into this product that I was really proud of. And although I'm not super comfortable saying it, like one of the world leaders in the field, in that field, totally comfortable being a dad and a mentor in that area. And now in machining, oftentimes I feel like there are some younger folks in the industry who I have enough sort of like personal experience to just be like, yeah, here's a better way to approach that problem. But I often don't feel like I have enough experience, like what it's like to run a shop or how to machine a really hard part to be 100% comfortable. So a few of the folks who maybe are listening to this will hear me like often give advice if it's asked for. I try not to give advice until it's asked for. Sometimes fail, often fail, probably.
Don't we all? Don't we all?
But then I'll I'll catch myself and be like, look, I'm giving you this advice, but you should probably go ask somebody else too. Cause like, I maybe don't know what I'm talking about here.
Well, so let's get to that second part of that question though, because I think that actually is something that I don't even know the answer to. You had kind of mentioned in your backstory, you thought this NASA was going to be your forever job. So like, to kind of build off of Zap's question, how did Andy entice you away from this? Because like, even if he wanted to do something and you guys were friends and you built something before, this was your forever job. You were an industry leader in it. A, how did he get you to even think about leaving that? And then B, how did it feel to jump into an industry where there have been some flameouts? You know, there have been the plethoras and other things like that.
The plethora one is the easier one to answer. I was intellectually aware of what had happened there, but not emotionally or like cognitively aware of it. And that's the part where I just sort of like, I'm dumb enough and like brazen enough to just blindly jump into a problem that's so hard that other people failed. Like, it just seems to be what I do. So when I say I'm pathologically attracted to like the hardest problem, I did the same thing at NASA. The person who eventually became my PhD advisor originally started out like in 2008. I met him as this punk kid and I told him what I wanted to do. And he was basically flat out said like, it's not possible, you know, and then we worked together for like 14 years to make it possible. And it was really hard. And so I guess that's just where I'm comfortable. And like, if it's not that hard, I kind of just am not interested in it, I guess. So that part of it, I just was too dumb to know what I didn't know, to be frank. How did Andy lure me away from NASA? NASA was definitely my forever job. I was not looking for a new home. I was very happy there. Didn't want to leave Cleveland. In fact, months before I decided to join Toolpath, I very seriously considered taking a job with a California startup. My wife and I, Sharon, we couldn't stomach the idea of moving to the Bay Area. It's just too different from Cleveland. It's just, we had a small child at that point, and the idea of locking her and him into like a tiny shoebox apartment with like a vibrating 5-year-old boy just seemed insane. And she knows what my work ethic is. I like minimum 80 hours a week, whether I have to or not. And so like, it was just not the move we were going to make. And so we kind of like walked away from that experience saying like, okay, I guess not for us, better settle in for the long haul at NASA. And then like the next day, Andy called and he was like, do you want to do this other thing? And to be frank, like the decision was way easier than it ever should have been. I missed a chance to join SpaceX when I was pretty young. I'm not sure my marriage would have survived me joining SpaceX, but it would have been like when they were building rockets on a tropical island, like just trying to figure like I'm the guy you want there, right? Like I can weld stuff. I don't care. I'll make whatever assumptions I have to make. Like that would have been fun for me, like fun at a level I couldn't even imagine. But I didn't do it. I was working at NASA. I didn't do it.
It sounds to me like you needed a harder problem to solve. Like you had kind of gotten to the point at NASA where you're like, all right, I got the real hard part of this solved. Like there's still some stuff to work out, but like I need to be challenged again.
That definitely was a big part of it. I had taken on a slightly new role at NASA where I was doing a lot more project management and a lot less technical work. And I don't want to say I was disillusioned with it. I wasn't. I was enjoying the new challenge of learning to navigate the bureaucracy at a whole new level. But I was definitely missing that, like, this is hard sort of like survival mode feel. And then frankly, like I said, Andy and I founded Rec Racing together. Andy was in my wedding. I was in his wedding. We've known each other forever. You know, when your best friend calls and the funding is there and you don't have to leave your house in Cleveland and like, you can't imagine, like there's never and by the way, we're going to put a CNC machine in your garage. So like, you know, lifelong goal of like, maybe one day I'll be able to do this achieved. I looked at Sharon and I said, I'm pretty sure like if I don't take this deal, there's no deal that I would ever take and I'll regret it. And she was like, well, then you have to go do it.
That's amazing.
And so, I mean, I don't want to portray it like it was an easy decision. There's a reason it took me 1.5 years to wind down at NASA, but the decision to start that process was way easier than it should have been.
That's sure. Killer. And then the last part of his question, what have you learned from the companies that preceded Toolpath?
You know, I think Zap deserves most of the credit for what I've learned. Zap spent time at Plethora. He watched what happened there. There are other companies that we looked at in the space too. I think the biggest thing we learned was don't cut parts. And that's not to say, obviously, we have a small R&D shop, and I did a few job shop jobs to like understand at an emotional level. That's how I like to think about it, what it means to be a machinist, to understand what you feel when you're going to go press the cycle start button. But for the problem we were trying to solve, which is like building software, we can't be distracted by the high capital costs of like building out a factory and like trying to, compete with proto labs or like play in the Xometry space or the plethora space. They're just different problems, right? Like scaling a machine shop is very, very hard, and economies of scale don't work super well for machining for like lots of really good reasons. Like, there are protein parts. You talk about that all the time. And then, there are other parts for other shops, and some shops can be chameleons and some shops can specialize in plate work and, plastic, like a million different reasons why it's just really hard to scale shops. And to be frank, I think the only folks, I know Hadrian's working in that space and I think they're doing okay. I don't have a ton of visibility, but we have the one example out there of like Proto Labs are the ones who have really scaled that. And they have a very narrow sort of like window of parts that they can handle well. And that's how they're able to scale. I think it's super impressive. I know that not everybody's thrilled with the kind of parts that they churn out, but I think a lot of their customers are, and there's a real market for that. And they provide a real service. They make tons of parts.
Yeah.
And parts, frankly, that I think wouldn't get made here in the States if they weren't making them. So yeah, I think we learned that we needed to avoid that trap of like the big fancy machine shop with the big fancy machines. Like we could learn what we needed to learn on not $1 million CNC machines.
Right.
And we had no business playing on those machines in the start. I personally still have no business playing on those machines.
Well, I think that the point that Zap and I talked a lot about when we first met you too was that it's very hard to sell a software to somebody when you're actively competing against them too.
Right. For sure.
Like that. For me as a shop owner, you being like, oh, I'm selling you the software, but I'm also using it to like steal parts from you. Like that, there's some level of not being genuine that comes across with that, regardless of like if that's actually what you guys were trying to communicate or not. And I think that it's a good choice of what you guys made.
We were always aware of that conflict and very concerned about it when we were making, job shop parts really only off Xometry. We had a few small customers from really some of my personal contacts and a few of Benjamin's. But the flip side of that for us was that I wanted to be able to tell people like I quote parts, like this is how I quote parts. And this is what my win rate is on them. And this is how many times I lost my shirt. And it was not about doing that forever, but I wanted to be believable to myself and to the people I was talking to. And when we felt like we reached that point, which I think coincidentally was right about the time that Al came on board, but he was very adamant, like, nah, we're not making parts for profit anymore. We're making parts to show what the tech can do.
Right.
And so that timing was good, but I'm really glad that I had that experience. And it makes me feel very comfortable having those conversations with customers. But for sure I think that is the number one lesson we learned, is that it's really, really easy to like feel like you're doing great when you have a giant building full of shiny machines. But for our company selling software, that was not the right move.
Yeah. No, I'm very glad you had that experience. Like, don't get me wrong. I think that informs so much about what it's very easy to see the benefit of Toolpath when you've gone through those struggles of like, man, I really did not expect that to be so hard. Or like, oh, that was the hard part was easy and the easy part was hard. That's so weird.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It makes you guys much more believable. And like one of us kind of feeling of like, oh, I like you and I have talked for quite a while now, and I almost never anymore feel like I can't come to you with like some kind of gripe about my day at business and you won't be able to commiserate. Like it's very rare that I come to you with something you're like, oh, I've never heard of that, or oh, that's a struggle I've never had to deal with. Like at this point, you're like, oh yeah, I remember that it does suck. You're right. Let's see. Sam R350 asked, where do you see Toolpath in 5 years? And congrats on what you've done so far, even in the past few months. The improvements are really impressive. Can't wait to see y'all at IMTS.
Thanks, Sam. I'm looking forward to seeing you again. I met Sam at the DSI Summit this year, and I really enjoyed it. I hope in 5 years that we are doing full 5-axis, and that we've got end-to-end simulation kind of nailed down. And that we are full on supporting companies like automation on their floor. I've been extremely lucky. The one thing that Toolpath has afforded me, like the sort of unique opportunity to do, at least unique for me, I never would have had this opportunity had it not been for Toolpath, is to visit a pretty wide range of shops. And thank goodness for folks who allow me to come into their shops. Like the Servants let me just come in and hang out and watch their shop. And I got to spend time in CJ Abraham's shop, and like his shop feels like sitting in the future, right? Like everybody's shop needs to work that way. Not right now, not everybody has like parts that can fit on a Williman. That's like, it's not fair to CJ to call that the easy button for automation, but it's the easier button for automation.
It's pretty close. I remember when he was on the podcast, he pulled up Chatter while we were talking. It was like, oh yeah, my uptime's 98%, right? I'm like, you gotta be kidding me, dude. Like, this is insane.
I mean, he had a group of guys from Toolpath there. Tim was there. I was there. Benjamin was there. Adam Morley was there filming some stuff. And like, he's making parts and he's not stressed and he's not loading material. And like, at one point they asked him to shut the machine down so it wouldn't make noise in the background. And he's like, okay.
That's so cool.
It's like that, but that's what it needs to look like, because we need to be spending our time figuring out how to machine the really hard parts. And then the machines need to be making them. And that's not to say that you're not going to struggle to get that first part. That's always going to be a thing. But like an 8-minute cycle time where you're stuck in front of the machine and you can't do anything else, that needs to go away if we're ever going to bring manufacturing back. And so honestly, 5 years from now, I would love it if Toolpath could give everybody the opportunity to run the shop the way CJ runs, or frankly, the way Sam runs his shop at CAD Models. I mean, they have Trinity systems and like lights out manufacturing is, it's beautiful. That's how it should be. Everybody should have the opportunity to do that. And whether it's pallet loading or part loading, if we're not able to support people getting into that space, and it's not just us, obviously, there's integrators and there's robots and pallet systems, like all of those are key pieces of the puzzle that we don't have solutions to. But I would love to be a critical part in that chain. And there are some signals that that's where it's coming from. Like I know Tim has talked to some folks, big integrators of like pallet systems, and they talk about how, the machines are hungry. Feed the beast, I think is what Alex Kern said, right? And all of it, and all of a sudden, like you can't get enough programmers to keep those machines busy. And so that's an opportunity for Toolpath to come in and help alleviate a bottleneck. In my old job, I used to say that optimizers were pieces of software that were the perfect tool to automatically find any bug in your model, because any little weakness, it would exploit it. And that's like instantly, right? And automation is kind of that for machining. Like it's like the perfect system to automatically find any little weakness in your shop process.
100%. Like, oh, that corner builds up with chips. Oh, get ready for the mountain tomorrow that caused X-axis, servo overload or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I don't like hearing that people are running into the bottleneck, because I don't want them to hit that bottleneck, but that's the problem we're trying to solve. And so honestly, in 5 years, if we're not a key part of that solution and moving forward on automation and hopefully, closing the loop and maybe even doing stuff with Chatter and other machine monitoring softwares, that's where we need to be to really help the industry move forward.
Totally. Yeah. Linus asked, how are you going to have stress analysis for vibrations on toolpaths that are less rigid? So he's thinking of like tall, thin work pieces on a 5-axis application.
We're not. It's too hard. It's impossible.
It sounds like it's going to keep you busy for at least a little bit then.
That's a really cool question, in part because it intersects so strongly with what I used to do at NASA. The optimization stuff I did was on finite element analysis. And so me and a few other folks at the company actually have a pretty deep background in that type of analysis and how to bring it into this space. There are some real challenges there. Like, it's computationally expensive. You think computing toolpaths takes a long time? Like, try running FEA. Certainly FEA accurate enough to capture the dynamic events of chatter. Chatter is so complicated, right? And it's chatter in the end mill, or chatter on the part, or chatter up in the taper, and like, what's your drop-off force? Like, and there are some companies out there like Third Wave that have some really cool tech that I've heard some really good things about. I haven't had a chance to play with it myself. If anybody from those companies is listening and thinks I sound cool enough to maybe work with, let's chat. But
they're going to be at IMTS, and I'm planning on stopping by their booth, because it's the same thing. You go to their website and you're like, this looks like either total BS or the coolest thing I've ever never heard of.
I think it's the coolest thing. It's also like really expensive though, like really computationally expensive to run. And so to imagine like running that inline on every toolpath right now is a little mind blowing for me. Maybe Moore's law will catch up and quantum computers and like GPUs will fix all the problems magically. So I guess I haven't given a great answer. We are planning to specifically look to identify thin wall parts. We will almost certainly start with some simple heuristics to just like warn you, hey, like the aspect ratio of this wall is really tight and you're using a big end mill pushing it really hard. So probably it's not going to work. If you're trying to make a heat sink, you'd imagine seeing a lot of those warnings.
Right. Right.
That's where we would start. As for like doing finite element analysis, I've done enough of it to just be frank that save, a couple of companies like Third Wave. I have yet to see anybody have like a credible finite element analysis that can actually provide a realistic simulation of life. And part of it is just that everybody's machine is different, right? Like if you're not running high quality hydraulic or shrink fit holders or like the power grip stuff, and you've got like your grandpa's ER32 collets that like he rolled around in the dirt with or something, like it's going to be a whole different ball game than if you have good tooling and a rigid spindle that doesn't have tons of run out and good holders. Like it's just, and nobody's putting that much information into their sims. I know they're not. So
right.
I think unfortunately the reality is that level of inline sim is far away. And that's honestly why I'm spending a lot of my effort right now making sure that there's a lot of control that our users have on feeds and speeds, because everybody's shop is a snowflake. And I don't mean that in a derogatory term by any sense. It's just everybody runs their machines differently, is comfortable with different stuff, has different limitations. The parts are different, work holding's different. And that really manifests itself in the type of tooling you choose and the kind of feeds and speeds you run. And I don't think an AI system that can't adapt the way you adapt to that is worth anything.
Yeah. I kind of wonder if, I don't know if you, so I follow this YouTube channel called Corridor Digital, and they were talking in one of their podcasts or videos recently. It's the first use of cryptocurrency that made sense to me, and it's called the render network. And so you join up, you can link your computer to the render network, and when you're off hours or whatever, other people can pay render token to upload their scene from, whatever rendering software they're using. I think it's Octane that you have to use or something. And it will render like something that would take your local computer 24 hours in 30 minutes. And then all the computers that are linked get paid in render token. And then you can go ahead and spend that stuff on more renders for yourself. And like, I could see something like that working pretty well. Like, let my computer horsepower be used overnight by people in New Zealand or whatever, like when I'm not using it. And then I get to turn around, take that same money, put it back into like, give me my toolpaths for tomorrow kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. It's like SETI at home, but they figured out how to make the economy of it work.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I could see something like that working where you're offloading really high level simulation like that to a network, cloud network, or a server farm or something, like, because like you said, right now there's no way you're gonna chug through. I mean, it would be a 24-hour, a 48-hour simulation for like a 30-second toolpath.
Right. Yeah. But I think maybe there's a space for it for like, every once in a while you get that like impossible part with that stupid long reach tool, and like you just need to know where to put the hot glue, and like you can't put it everywhere, but like the sim could. So maybe there's a place for it in like those super hard problems. My opinion is those are the kinds of problems that AI needs to clear your plate so you can focus on, right? Like everybody's got a bracket in their life. I'm pretty sure that Tom said that. Everybody's got a bracket, right? And so look, if there's a bracket with no tolerances and everything's a clearance hole, like probably you shouldn't be spending your time programming that anymore.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And I know the truth is that like with good Fusion templates, you're probably not spending much time programming that right now, but like you should spend zero time. We need to drive that to zero because the part doesn't matter, right? Like it's going to be fine. If you have a good quality machine, it's going to be fine. And if it does matter, you just go make another one. It's no big deal. So we need to clear that off your plate so that you can focus on the hard problems. And that's why I really believe that what AI will actually do is not take your job away or replace you. It's like an arms race. Like as soon as you have the space and time to make harder parts, then those engineers will just be like, just like with 5-axis, like now that everybody has everybody in quotes, now that many people have a 5-axis, I don't have a 5-axis.
Right. And now that it is more common to have 5-axis for sure.
All of a sudden there's like cross holes and features at all kinds of random angles that you would never have seen 20 years ago. And the same will happen with AI. I have very firm belief in that it'll just make it so that all of a sudden those parts that are like so hard to program that you just no quote them, you'll see them all the time because the AI helps you do it and it makes it so you have the time to do it. And so I think that's what it'll come down to. And tools like Third Wave and FEA and simulation will end up becoming critical parts of that because the parts will just get that hard.
Right. Well, and hopefully the flip side of that is true, where AI will also be like, hey, you sure you actually need this?
Oh man, I sure hope so. There was a time when we actually tried to pitch Toolpath as a DFM product to the other side, to the people requesting parts. And I really do hope that we get back to that. That is on our roadmap to offer that service because, man, people really need it. And it's not even always that people don't know what they're doing. Like I designed the test part that we use. You've seen it in almost every Toolpath demo. It's like called like bike clamp top or something. It's a part I designed because I wanted this bike work stand clamp. I wanted to make it. 3 years in on Toolpath, my personal side project, I've still made like 4 of them and it's not finished. It's unassembled sitting in front of me right now. But that part, like at one point I was camming it and going to run it on the machine that was 10 feet away from me. And I still put a radius that was too small for the tooling I had to cut on it. Right. And like, I didn't realize it until I was camming it and like about to go run it on the machine. Right. And so even the guy designing the part, camming the part and running the part still messed it up. Right.
Right.
So
the smallest closed loop possible. And you still, didn't realize it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff that like I, in addition to helping me program, helping my customers catch the dumb stuff early, or even, suggest like, oh, are you sure you need it this thick? Because stock sizes say that it's actually, here's the stock sizes that are common and you're going to incur extra costs. Like those kind of things I think would be fantastic tools to give to my customers, be like, oh, run it through this stuff. But even if it just saves me time in quoting, I'm stoked on that kind of stuff.
We had one early DFM customer who I got to use the software. I convinced him to test it because I was like, you have a machinist. You have one machinist. I know you ship out some parts, but when you need it fast, you go to your in-house machinist. And I guarantee you, I bet, that there's been times when you hand him a part and he's really upset with you because he doesn't have the tooling to make it and you asked him to get it done in an hour, right? And so like the way Toolpath works, it'll match tooling. And if you haven't seen the demo, it'll basically highlight features in red that you don't have the tooling to make, right? And it could be because it's a sharp corner, or it could just be that you don't have the flute length or the radius to reach. And so if you're in a situation like that and you're about to go ask your machinist to make this part today, like that part better be all green, right? Like do not even go to him until it's all green.
Yeah, exactly.
And if there's red stuff and you have to go to him, at least okay, like we're going to have a discussion about how I changed this part or what tooling he has to buy or how many cases of beer I owe him to make this part, right?
Exactly, yeah.
The same should be true for a shop, right? Like if just because you can't get the part to be all green, right? Maybe there's some stupid 10XD feature that they need, right? And says that's why they come to Protium because you'll figure it out. But at least they know that it's not going to be a cheap part.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that, I know for a fact my shop is never going to get all green parts. Like my customers kind of rely on us to throw the red flags and say, hey, you sure you want this? And then when they go, yep, it's like, all right, we'll figure it out. Sure. If you insist. So yeah, but I think tools like that, I'm very excited for. I think that all around it will save everyone time and money, which is great. Last question. Ethan asked, let's hear about the dog bed in the corner of your office, because I hear there is a funny story about this.
I don't know what funny story he's talking. There is a dog bed in the corner of my office. So, I mean, my shop is only about, the Toolpath shop is only about 3 miles from my house, which again, like, why did I join Toolpath? Like, there are some perks. And I have a dog we adopted during the pandemic, and she's a little bit crazy. And so we bring her to the shop sometimes. And I was hopeful that she could be a shop dog, and maybe she will someday, but
So I'll share the funny story then, because he told me to make sure that you talked about this. Apparently, when him and his team came to visit you, they asked you about the dog bed, and you said, "Oh, sometimes in the early stages of Toolpath, I would sleep there when it got really late." And apparently, you said it so straight faced that they were like, "I don't know if he's joking or not. This is a little worrying."
I have no memory of saying that. That's the funniest thing. That is exactly the kind of thing I would say and say deadpan. But no, I don't think I've ever slept at the shop. I've been here pretty late every night this week while Zap was visiting, because we're both workaholics and it's kind of cool to have, misery loves company. No, I don't think I've ever slept on that dog bed. And Acorn's never, my dog Acorn's never spent more than maybe 5 minutes on it. But man, that's funny that I don't.
That's amazing. Oh, man. All right, Justin, well, that brings us on to shop news and new things. You shared the NC Viewer acquisition. Anything else new or exciting you can share with us?
There's a lot that's going to be announced at IMTS, and I probably shouldn't say much more than that. I get myself in trouble. There's a lot of new features that have come out on Toolpath. And we are starting to think seriously about doing multi-axis stuff. We have a 4th axis on our Sile and starting to think about maybe graduating to 3+2, getting a 5-axis machine. So definitely carving out space in the shop for that. We have space for 1 or maybe 2 machines, depending on when we're ready and when the right ones come along. And I'm starting to think heavily about adding a robot to one of the machines. Really, really grateful to Graham and Chris Graham at Lights Out Manufacturing and Chris Zapatini for letting Toolpath help with their IMTS demo. That's going to be super cool. They're going to be running a cobot, UR robot on, like all of IMTS. It's going to be awesome. So much cutting, so much aluminum, so many chips. And so being a part of that has really and then also seeing CJ's shop has got me really jazzed for figuring out how that path works for us, and how to make sure Toolpath lines up for that. So I don't have a robot on order or anything yet, but it's next on my shopping list.
Awesome. That's super cool. All right. Well, I got a couple questions then before we wrap. Reminder to Patreons, I will post probably this weekend to ask for your ideas for new last 4 questions. They are in the middle of being changed, but right now I'm keeping with what did you research this week? Doesn't have to be manufacturing related. It's always interesting to see what interesting people are looking into.
My whole life is pretty much manufacturing related. I did do a little bit of research on bodywork for my wife's car. There was a small rust spot that turned into a big hole as soon as we touched it with a wire brush. And I do have a TIG welder, so I busted out YouTube, and YouTube is the greatest collection of knowledge in human history. So, how do I use this TIG welder to patch this hole, and how do I Bondo and paint it? I think I did okay on the bodywork. The paint is kind of questionable, but it'll pass. So I did a little bit of research on that and carved out a little bit of time. But other than that, all Toolpath all the time for me. So the big stuff that I'm starting to look into is computational efficiency and server architectures. I'm hopeful that lots of people will think we're cool at IMTS and want to sign up for the system. And I'm going to have to figure out how to grow our server architecture to support it, because we are a cloud company. And so we do run up in the cloud. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking at now. If anybody else wants to geek out on Lambda functions and server architectures, come find me at IMTS.
I bet you will have people take you up on that. Let's see. Give us a tip that you learned this week. This was a suggested one from Doug from the Patreon. So tip of the week, Justin, what do you got?
I learned that you can ramp an AX FPS at 20 degrees on a BT30 machine. I think we were going at 12 degrees. We were not going anywhere near as hard as Chris pushed that tool. And it worked fine. I'd probably back it off a little bit for production work. I'd save my spindle maybe and make sure the tool lives a little longer. But man, you can move a lot of material really fast with those roughers. It's pretty crazy. I would not have had the guts to push that tool that hard. So I was happy to let Chris give it a try. But yeah, those tools cut, they rip.
It was wild to see. I know Chris said that he sent it to Doug, and even Doug was shocked by the kind of material removal that you guys were getting on a BT30 machine.
And I guess to elaborate on that, I really like the PG holder stuff that we have. You helped me pick it out, but we have PG 15 stuff, and we took a really aggressive profile cut and we destroyed a tool, which is totally fine. Like that was, fine. Can't know the limit till you cross it. But it's really interesting because the general consensus was if that had been a PG 25 holder, it would have cut. And if it had been like a Cat 40 or an HSK 63, it definitely would have cut. So seeing firsthand, kind of drawing back to that question about simulation and stuff, seeing firsthand how complex that system is and how much like the quality of your tooling and the maintenance of your machine really matters. Yeah, buy big rigid holders because they save you time and they let you cut material faster. Who knew good tooling was worth it? But
well, and it is such a spectrum too, because had you put that tool in like an ER32, it wouldn't have made it through the initial ramp,
Yeah.
Or if it did, it would have pulled out on the profile cut for sure and blown up. So it really, like, you can take your one machine and put 100 different holders in there and get 100 different data points that are completely different. And that's, I think, what makes it just so hard. It's so hard to even give advice, I think, in this industry because of that. Like, there's so often that Chris and I, we get questions on our shared episodes, and it's like, well, it depends. Like, there's so many variables. Like, I can't tell you. I can tell you what I've done, and I can tell you what's worked for me, and I can tell you the variables I have encountered. But like, maybe, like you said, maybe your ER collets are super dirty, or maybe you don't know how to clean a PG holder correctly. Or like I found out recently from the Rigo rep, he was like, oh, we now recommend like a heavy solvent for the first cleaning of a PG collet because we found that every instance of pullout that we've seen has been due to people not cleaning off the packaging grease well enough.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's like, that's the same collet, same holder in two completely different results. Like one survives, makes a gorgeous part. One pulls out, destroys the collet, maybe destroys the tool for sure. And it's like, ugh, that sucks.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I guess tip of the week. Yeah, if you want to know how hard your machine can cut, have Zap out to your shop. He'll figure it out for you.
That is a great tip. And then last up, what is a win from this week that you can share with us?
My favorite win for this week was getting the IMTS keychains packaged up and shipped. Benjamin worked really hard, spent a lot of time getting a really nice surface finish on those things, and I just didn't want them to like ship in a box and rub up against each other and get scratched. And I know I can tell, I hear about it all the time. This is stuff everybody makes good parts, cares about all the time. But it was my first time shipping out like a large number of parts that I needed to like package that I couldn't just like wrap them all in bubble wrap real quick because it was like 5 parts. So I designed like a little 3D printed pallet, put it on the bamboo, printed it off. And then I posted it on our internal Slack channel, and everybody had an opinion about how to make it better. And to be frank, at first I was a bit annoyed. Like everybody had an opinion, and I was like, guys, I just need to print these things and get them in a box. But all of their suggestions like were really good. And I got the print time cut in half and the amount of plastic cut in like 60%. And that's the reason I'm not still printing pallets in right now. So, lesson to be learned there is that sometimes decision by committee is a good thing. But yeah, that was a big win. There was a bunch of other ones. Like one of the developers got like a 50% speed up on parts. We deployed a bunch of new features to Toolpath. The stock sizing algorithm, I'm really excited about that. It automatically picks stock. Getting that pushed out to production was cool. Yeah, so lots of great stuff. I wish I had, well, I don't wish I had, but I don't have any non-Toolpath stuff to talk about right now because that's just my whole life. I'm going to take a nap after IMTS and maybe a bike ride. So maybe if I come back on again, I'll have some non-Toolpath wins to talk about. But right now it's all Toolpath all the time.
No, we love the passion here. That is fantastic. As someone equally obsessed with my own business, I can totally empathize and sympathize. It's hard to, you go out with like friends or something and they're like, look, what's going on in your life? You're like, work. It's like, it's great,
Yeah. I made some cool parts today.
Yeah. So I totally understand. That's fantastic. Well, Justin, let us know where we can find you and Toolpath online, all that good stuff.
Instagram at Toolpath Labs. I'm at Justin S. Gray on Instagram and Justin S. Gray on GitHub, which is actually the place you might want to find me. That's where my SILE macros are if anybody wants them, and my post processor that has probing for it. And Yeah. Otherwise, justin.gray@toolpath.com. You can shoot me an email or just toolpath.com. You can reach out there. So that's how you find me.
Well, thank you so much. It has been great to finally make this happen. I know we've been talking for so long. I've been looking forward to an episode with you. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And thanks to all the patrons who make this show possible. Let me send people like Justin mics, even though he's ending up using Zap's mic this week for even better audio quality. Thank you all for listening, and I will be back next week.